Hi, I'm your host, Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and I'm really excited to welcome to today's episode of the InnovaBuzz podcast, all the way from Houston in Texas, Carol Enneking, who's a transformational speaker and author and a consultant specializing in helping individuals and organizations redefine success, restore balance, and create a culture of belonging. Carol's also the author of The Rebalancing Act, Wisdom from Working Women for Success That Matters, a book inspired by her own journey of navigating the challenges of balancing career, family, and personal growth, challenges that we all have. Now, welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast, Carol. It's a great privilege to have you as my guest.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
Now, I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. I find it fascinating how you've combined your global corporate experience, which no doubt you'll call on today, with your passion for helping people focus on success that matters. And I like that term, the success that matters. Can you share with us more about what drives you in this mission and the impact you aim to make today?
Sure. I really want people to learn the lessons that I learned the hard way. I'd like them to learn easier. And so I want to pay it forward and give back by sharing the lessons that I learned, but also the lessons of all the people that I interviewed for the book, because we we learn things from experience. And unfortunately, some of those experiences aren't always good ones. And while you can't prevent all of that from happening, there are some things I believe you can do to make it easier for yourself to navigate through all this. Life is very busy. We have a lot coming at us all the time. And I think sometimes we just stay so busy that we don't have the time to just stop and think about whether we're even doing the right things.
Hmm,
So that's what I'm passionate about sharing with others.
wonderful. If you could encapsulate those experiences that you referred to there into, say, two or three themes, what would they be?
Oh, goodness. Well, I think I used to always like to say you can have it all, but not at the same time. But I think beyond that, you have to define what it even is, because it's so easy to fall into traps of setting your own expectations for your life based on what you think you should do or what you think society or others expect of you. And so I think getting really clear on what matters to you and what drives you is critical. And I think there are three words that guided my journey, and I think they are transformative words to help you let go of the things that are holding you back and really embrace what matters. And those three words are surrender, trust, and faith.
Hmm. Okay. Can you elaborate a little bit more on those three words? Sort of good to get a bit deeper.
And what So I'm very type A. I've been one of those that would just dive into any project. My boss used to tell me she could give me anything to do. And even if it was something I had no experience with, I would get in there and problem solve and find ways to take care of it. So I just always was taking on challenges and keeping myself extremely busy. But at what cost? I think the cost to me personally, the cost to my relationships, took their toll, and I think that it took me a while to really figure out that I had to stop the madness. I wanted to be in control. I like to have plans and know where I'm going and work toward them, and really don't like things getting in the way. But life has a way of getting in the way, and I think the first time I learned a lot about that was when I became a mother, and all of a sudden it was like my life is not my own anymore. I'm responsible for one, and then two other little humans, and so I learned to be very flexible and accept those curveballs. But I also had to surrender. I had to surrender my plans and really look at whether by going with the flow, I could open myself up for some bigger, better plans that left to my own advices or devices, I wouldn't have even had the chance to pursue. So that's the surrender
Mhm.
part. And then trusting is when things go wrong, trusting in the hope for the future, trusting that this too shall pass, things will get better. Taking one step at a time, even if you don't know where the path is leading, will get you to a better place. And although we'd love to hit the fast forward button through these tough times, We can't. That's where the learning is. But we've got to be willing to move forward without knowing all the answers. And that also takes faith. I am a Christian. That's my faith. There are a lot of different faiths out there, but I think having a belief in something bigger than yourself is very helpful. It's very humbling to realize that you're kind of a small cog in this much bigger picture of life out there, whatever your faith looks like. I think just being grounded in something broader and larger than yourself helps you keep perspective in a better way. And so all of those things all together helped me through some of my darkest days and really helped me to transform my life when I had no intention of trying to transform my life. I think I had to be dragged kicking and screaming into that transformation because I thought life was pretty good. But then when things go bad, when things go wrong, when something comes out of left field, in my case, it was waking up to the realization that my marriage was irrevocably broken and I needed to leave. And that meant leaving a lot of security and a lot of my lifestyle, my stability, the way we had, approached life as a regular old nuclear family. All of that had to change. And at first, I guess I thought staying in a bad situation was better than getting out of the situation because that was so hard. It would take time and get me out of my comfort zone. And while I love change, I have led innovation projects. I love change when it comes to corporate things, to business things. In my own personal life, I found I really don't love change so much. And so it kind of had to be thrust upon me. And I reached this, as they say, the straw that broke the camel's back, where I said, that's enough. And I've got to move on and I've got to do something different. And it was scary and it was terrible. It was, not the only tough time I've ever had, but it was probably about the lowest time of my life up until that point, and really worrying about the children and our lives and how to fix everything, how to rebalance, which is the title of my book. It was rethinking what life was all about for me. And I had lived so many years thinking about the person my parents expected me to be, the person I expected myself to be, growing up in that cookie cutter mold of how life was supposed to be. And I spent so much time worried about things that really don't matter. I mean, it's good to have stability and a good life and wonderful children. And I'm thankful for my kids every day. They're adults now. But it's not what defines you. And if you go a different path, if you blaze your own path, your own trail, instead of just looking at all the ones other people have gone on, you can open yourself up to so many more amazing experiences in your life. And it took me, I think I was well into my 40s before I started learning that lesson. So just want to encourage people to take the time and not to let this busyness and this constant juggling act we have for all the various roles in our lives, not to let that define us or to consume us so much that we can't stop to really make sure we're focused on where we're headed, what our life is all about, what we want our legacy to be, and what matters most. Because I waited too long, I think, to get clear on there.
Yeah. Sometimes I look back on the things that I've done and learnt over the journey, and I think, I wish I could go back 30 or 40 years with everything I know now. And
Isn't that funny? Wisdom is such a great teacher.
Yeah. And it's all, and I keep thinking, gee, I'm a slow learner because it's taken me so long to get to this point. Yeah.
Yeah. And then when I speak with younger parents, especially people who are just embarking on that journey of trying to balance being a great parent, being a great employee, doing everything else well, I see that the more we think things might have changed, the more they stay the same. There's still all that pressure. Maybe it comes from different sources now. They can look on social media and see how to have a perfect party and, perfect children's announcement of, when you have kids and pose the perfect pictures of every milestone and bake the perfect cake and everything else. And it's like you start to get this false sense that life ought to look like your social media posts. And that's a lot of
It
pressure.
is, yeah. So it's fascinating. You talked about trust and letting go, and faith as well. To me, one of the things that popped up in my mind as you were speaking through that, the trust in that there'll be other opportunities or so on. I thought, well, that really integrates perfectly with the letting go, because I'm very similar to you. I kind of feel most comfortable when I'm in control of the situation I'm in, and I know what I'm doing, and I know if I pull this lever, that's the response that's going to happen. And if I pull that lever, this will be the response. And so I can drive wherever I want to go. But letting go of expectations, for example, and also having in the back of my mind the trust, okay, if this doesn't happen this way, then there'll be something else. And there'll be a reason it doesn't happen that way. And if I'm curious and figure out, okay, why did it happen differently than why was the outcome different than what I postulated? And what does that open up in terms of possibilities? So there's sort of, I see the trust coming into that aspect as well. And then the faith part, certainly not taking yourself too seriously, because if we see, hey, I'm just a little cog in this massive universe, and it's great to be reminded of that every now and then. I remember I had kind of an experience similar to that, just like being reminded of that. I'm conscious of it quite a lot, but we were at Mariposa Grove in Yosemite the year before last, and it's the first time I've ever been there. First time I've seen the huge eucalypts here in Australia, but it's the first time I've seen the big, what are they called? The huge trees there.
Redwoods,
Yeah,
or well, that's in
the
California.
redwoods.
Yeah,
Yeah, the massive redwoods, and there are trees there that are 3,000 and 4,000 years old, and you
yes.
think, what have they
You look
seen?
like an
Yeah,
ant.
that's right. I mean, the size of them is massive. Um,
Mhm.
but to contemplate, wow, 3,000 years ago, that's kind of before even the pyramids were built. And like they've
Mhm.
been here and well, I haven't witnessed all this stuff that's happened in that time, but they've basically been living through that whole period. And you think, gee, and here I am. And, with the few years that we spend here on this earth, and it's interesting the feelings that come up if you're reminded how insignificant you really are, and things become less important. So it kind of puts things in perspective.
They do. Yeah, I had a similar experience visiting Italy, and I had been there in my younger years, but just going back recently with my husband, I do have a lovely, amazing husband now, a second act. So I'm living proof that you can go
There's
through some bad
yeah,
stuff and end up very happy on the other
there's
side.
always
But he's in
opportunities. Yeah.
construction. We're looking at the Colosseum.
Mm,
And we're thinking, how in the world did they build that without modern machinery?
mm,
And I mean, it's just amazing to look back at these structures that are a few thousand years old, not nearly as old as those trees. But, the more you visit some of those areas of the world where the ancient civilizations were, the more you realize they were pretty creative back
mm,
then. And they had ways of doing things that we would have never thought possible. And what really hit me too, I went to a cathedral and they talked about how people in the town would work on this cathedral. I think in one case it took several hundred
mm.
years to complete the cathedral. So you're going to work every day and working on something that you won't ever
That's
see
right.
completed in your life.
Mm.
And I think, wow, here I am wanting to see closure and completion and wrap everything up in a neat little bow. And life's not like that
Mm.
sometimes, and these people knew that what they were creating was something bigger than themselves and something that would outlive them.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's kind of to the
it's quite amazing. I mean, there's so much, there's so many amazing buildings like that throughout the world, and you have to admire the ingenuity of the people that designed that and the vision that they had. At the same time, I always think of, gee, here's this massive construction that they put together. How many slaves suffered to do that? Because the people that did the labor, they probably wouldn't have had a
That
very
was
pleasant
another
life.
that was a really tough
Mm.
realization because when they talked about, like, the Romans, they were sitting over there partying the whole time, watching other people do all the
Yeah.
work, and that is that really makes you pause too and think, "Wow, that's been going on for a long time," and it kinda makes you think about the psychology of it all, like, how could you think that's okay? Because it's
Mm.
so not okay, and you wonder what was going through their head at the time, but I don't know, maybe the only thing they were thinking of was having another glass of wine or
Yeah.
something, but, it was really fascinating and makes you stop and contemplate a lot of things.
Mm. All right. So the power of letting go. Let's talk about the idea of success that matters. Kind of touched on it initially, and you mentioned that we set ourselves expectations that are often based on societal norms or what our parents thought was best for us, and um, sometimes that's inconsistent with who we really are. So, talk to us a little bit more about success that matters, and how do we kind of ask ourselves the question: Is what I'm doing really fitting into this success that matters box?
Yeah, and my parents are wonderful people, so
Mm.
I don't wanna diminish that, but I just
Yeah,
grew
well,
up, with
I mean,
superlative,
yeah,
"Be
they're
the best,"
all,
just
yeah.
and
I mean,
we're all human.
they're all doing what they think is best for us. So it's
Yeah, and it's hard because when you feel like you need to be the best and do all these things, and we raise children to kind of have goals and ambitions, and so we have people who show up at work to do a great job, hopefully, but a lot of these same people, they're very ambitious and dedicated in all areas of their lives, and the problem, I think, becomes that you want to give everything 100%. And so then you end up being overcommitted. You're wearing yourselves out. It's like pressing on the gas pedal in your car without letting up.
Mm.
It's maximum productivity, but it's going to burn the engine out. And I think that it's so easy to approach things and say, "Yes, I can do that." And just because you can doesn't mean that you're the right person to do it. And it's so easy to take on more than we should. And what I found in the interviews that I did for the book is that this is a really common problem. It wasn't just
Mm.
me. And I interviewed a lot of women. I interviewed some men too, and I really wanted to hear from the men's perspective what they see as things that are unique about women. Men and women do think differently, and and that's wonderful, and gives men and women both some wonderful qualities that are unique to them. But women tend to pile on a lot of expectations, at least the women that I talk to. And these are chief executives and women in every different walk of mainly professional careers, some of whom gave them up for various reasons. But they would say, I found myself just chasing after all the wrong things or saying yes too much and not having the power to say no. And so I think when you think about things in terms of what do I need to leave so that I can be great at a few really special things that are unique to me. And because when you try to give everything 100%, you end up giving everything about
Mm.
40% or something like that. And if you want to really think about what makes you unique, what is it that you bring? What value do you bring to your job, to any role that you play, whether it's caregiver, parent, volunteer, friend, whatever it is? What is it that you need to focus on, and what is it that you need to let go? And I think a lot of women have the trap of, well, I know how to do it, and I'll probably do it better than anyone else. So I think I'll just go ahead and do it myself. And that's not the answer either, because then you're not giving anybody else the chance to learn and grow and do those things. So I think we just somehow end up setting ourselves up for this burnout, and we have studies like I think the Conference Board just came out with another study that women over the last 6 years, I think 6 years running, they're the least happy population at work. And I think we're setting ourselves up by expecting everything to work on all cylinders all the time. And that's not realistic. We have different seasons in our lives. And in those seasons, different things need to take priority. And maybe when you have a lot going on in other areas of your life, you may not rise up that corporate ladder immediately and like a rocket ship. But that's okay, because it doesn't mean you can't do that later. I mean, I think people also think that when they make decisions, whatever they decide now will have impacts forevermore. Yeah. And, I know now from experience that I've had to make different decisions based on my values and what was needed at the time, different decisions at different times, but it's all worked out. And now I've had this amazing career. It's been a completely untraditional career path, but it's been amazing. And when I look back, I can see why things went the way they did. But when you're in the middle of it and things aren't going your way, like you said, you're kind of saying, wonder why this is happening. But if you trust that there's something better in store, that makes all the difference.
Yeah. It comes back to those 3 words. And I love the reframe that you put in there in terms of if I do everything, I'm denying somebody else the opportunity to develop that skill and so on. And that's because clearly people who aspire to senior roles, they're in leadership positions, and part of leadership is developing or helping to enable the people that you're leading to develop. And so I love that reframe.
We've had some funny stories in talking about this with women in particular, and they'll say, I need to let my kid load the dishwasher at night, or fold their own clothes, or not fold them. And maybe they won't do it like I would, but that's okay, because I'm teaching them. And it's funny how my kids are 25 and 27. They know adults who don't know how to do laundry and don't know how to do dishes. And we're not really doing our children any favors at home when we try to do everything for them. And it's the same at work. We tend to delegate things we don't like. But if we can delegate things we do like and try to create more leaders and create more people who know how to do great work, that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
But there's this tendency to hold on to it or to think it's quicker and more efficient to just do it yourself.
And also, there comes a point where we expect that people then know things. And
yes.
Well, where was the switch that turned that on? I mean, you have to actually.
Yeah, or they can't read our mind. What? Like, it's like, well, he should know I need his help. And it's like, well, no, people don't know if you don't tell them. People aren't mind readers.
That's right. So it's that development. It's funny. I was sort of reflecting on this a little bit. We were house sitting for my daughter during January, and during that time, we have blue-tongue lizards in Australia. So they're sort of about 30, 40 centimeters when fully grown. And on this one particular day, there was a baby blue-tongue, and it was tiny. It was like the size of a snail. And I looked up and was sort of concerned about it because we thought that's vulnerable and everything. And where's the parents protecting it and so on. So we looked up some more information on it. It turns out that these things bear their young live. So they're born, they're not hatched. And the moment they're born, the parents abandon them. And they're born capable of looking after themselves. So the moment they're born, they supposed to know what they do? Now, this one looked as though it was a bit disoriented and it was trying to come in through the window, which was completely unnatural behavior. But the next day, so a day later, it took off into the garden and we saw it a few times during the day, but it was behaving normally for a lizard. It was
Moving
yeah.
on.
And
That's
I sort of
fascinating.
thought, "Oh, that's interesting." A lot of humans think that's what happens, that, people become independent just like that, but it's not the case. But there
Yeah.
are life forms where that is the case.
Wow. Yeah. That's really fascinating. I love looking at nature for examples of these things, and I always laugh though because we live on a lake and we have a lot of ducks. And I always love the analogy of the ducks that look so elegant above the water and underneath they're paddling as fast as they can. But for some reason, the mama ducks like to come in our pool. And then we have the fun of trying to get the little ducklings out of the pool because they can't fly yet and they can't get out. So we have a little, it's called a lily pad, and it's a little inflatable thing that goes on the side of the pool that they can crawl up out of. But mama duck doesn't like it when we start trying to steer the duckling toward them. Yeah, I guess some of this is trial and error, but we don't want to have little drowning ducklings in our pool. So, but I love to just watch them and see how they behave with their young ones. And sooner or later, then you see them all just swimming and flying together, and it all works out.
Yeah, and
They
there's
teach 'em.
ducks are interesting because I've observed ducks here as well, and it's very clear that the parents, probably the mother duck mostly, is training, teaching the ducklings all the things that they need to survive, and it's interesting to watch. And so that's a lesson to take into life.
And they do it a lot faster than we do with our kids.
Now, you've in your corporate career, in particular, if I remember correctly, you've worked across the whole globe and worked with different cultures and people in different areas. What are some of the cultural leadership lessons that you've learned there that are kind of fascinating for us, where perhaps if we're in our own little environment, we might not have experienced?
Oh gosh, that's a big question. I'm laughing because if I had my way, I think I'd work in Italy all the time because we had a really good time. They were like, "Oh, we're going to talk about some employee data that you gathered. Let's go have some aperitif, and let's have dinner, and now let's go have some more to drink." And it was wonderful. And then I went to Germany the next day to talk to those leaders, and they were all business. Get down to business. Let's talk about why this is happening. Um, but I found a couple things. First of all, in doing leadership and management development around the globe, the issues are quite similar. Or what is very different is the degree to which people can share their experiences, especially with higher ups in the company, with openness and candor. And I expected that in certain countries, it would be harder to do that. And what I found, and this is just my experience, it's anecdotal. I wouldn't say it's, go write a book about it, but in some Asian countries where there's a premium on respect and deference to authority, they seem to have less trouble speaking about where shortcomings were happening at work than people in some of the Western cultures. And I think that's because they can focus on behaviors. They're not looking at the people like this person frustrates me or this annoys me, but it's more looking at things from a process standpoint and where things are breaking down and why. I found that in Europe, people have a lot more candor typically, but I do think it varies greatly from country to country. But I found that where people have a lot of trouble is the US. And it seems like the US, we're an outspoken people, and lots of people love to share their opinions, but when it comes to crossing the boss, people are very careful with that because they fear the retaliation.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, when it comes to employee culture surveys and things like that, we found that it was surprising that in the US, it was harder to get the real story out than in other parts of the globe. We also found there were big cultural gaps within the US. It was pretty funny because we had and not funny, haha, funny, ironic. We had an employee culture survey done, and we had native Spanish speakers. I'm here in Texas. We have a lot of people who speak Spanish as their native language. And of course, the survey was translated and back translated. So we knew that the questions made sense and the scores were really high. So when asked, they would score their managers and their environment very high. But then when it got to the free text questions, especially when they got to write it in their native language, the things they were saying weren't matching up with the results of the numerical survey. And so we found that the qualitative feedback was more telling than the scores on the page. And so we hired someone who was bilingual and an outside consultant who was a safe person to talk to kind of get to the heart of what was going on. And they were very afraid. There was a fear culture there. They were afraid of the retaliation. So when the number scores came up, they were like, yep, I know what the answer should be. But then when they had a chance to really say how they felt about things, a different story emerged. And so by having some follow-up conversations and being able to discern the root cause, the reason behind the reason, ask why 5 times, all of those continuous improvement type interventions, when we created that safe space for them to talk about that, we got a very different story. And so I think sometimes it's really easy for companies to feel like if they check the box and do some sort of survey or some quantitative data gathering, that they're getting a really good sense of what's going on. But I really would encourage companies, especially global companies, to look beyond and really get into the nuances and don't just assume based on numbers that everything's okay. I don't think anything can replace those conversations and focus groups and really getting to the why behind things.
Yeah, it's fascinating. My experience was, I had lots of global roles, and my experience was somewhat similar to yours, although I found in the teams I was leading, it was particularly in the Asian countries, they were expecting the leader to kind of know everything. And when the leader said something to whatever the leader said, yep, that's what we'll do. So there wasn't the cultural challenge. And I was always somebody who didn't say, okay, this is what we're going to do. I would kind of say, here's the situation and here's what I'm thinking, but what do you think we should do? And asking for that input. And for a long time, I found it very challenging to get any input that wasn't, we agree with you.
Right.
And
yeah, I've had experience of like that as well.
And a lot of times I would say, it's okay not to agree with me. I want to hear what you think, and then we'll work it out together. But that didn't work. So, and I remember a couple of really key breakthroughs where people that I'd least expected to say anything all of a sudden got up and said, here's some ideas that we'd like to pursue, and here's the help we need to pursue these ideas. And they were kind of out of the standard box thing. And I thought, that's amazing. I remember a couple of those breakthroughs, and they were almost emotional from my point of view, because I could see, okay, these people, clearly they were motivated to pursue the suggestions that they had, and they were speaking out, which was a first.
Yeah. And that takes time. That takes time and an investment in building a relationship. Because when you were saying that, I was thinking about all the times that executives I've worked with would walk in and they might really want to know what somebody thinks. But everybody's putting it through the filter of, okay, well, once an executive asked me that and I told him what I thought and it didn't work out or well, or he didn't really listen or she didn't. But you've got to get to know them. And companies, I understand people want to slash travel budgets and save money and things like that. But there is nothing like being out there, looking people in the eye and getting to know them on their home turf. And even growing up and living in Houston over 50 years, I thought I understood Latin culture. But traveling to Ecuador and Colombia and some other South American countries helped me understand just how unique every South American country is. And even though they mainly speak Spanish, I mean, you've got Portuguese in Brazil, but they all have their own dialects. They all have their own cultures, their own way of doing things. And it's very different from Ecuador to Colombia and very different than Mexico. And I think it's really easy. People, especially in the U.S., travel to Mexico for vacations because there's beautiful places and beaches and stuff. But we think we understand Spanish culture. And it's like, no, you understand Mexico, which is different than Spain, which is different than all the other countries. And the same goes for any corner of the world. But we tend to want to put things in buckets and compartmentalize things and use Zoom meetings. And we think that that's going to work. And boy, getting on the ground and just learning. There's no substitute.
That's right. And I mean, it's even more diverse than that. I know, I mean, I lived in Germany for many years, and the north of Germany is different to the east, the old East Germany, or the west of Germany, and the south is different. Again, you talked about the south is a little bit more like Italy, if you like, because I remember when I worked for ACFA and we were in training, I was very young then, we were in training in Munich in the old, in their old photo school, just fabulous time. But we would start work at 7 and at 10 o'clock it was time for breakfast, they called it. But breakfast was bratwurst and a liter of beer.
A beer?
A beer.
And then you go to the Hofbrau house. Yeah, that's a lot like Italy.
And then you go back to work again. And whereas the same company where I actually worked in the west of Germany, in Leverkusen, they wouldn't even let you go out to have a beer at lunchtime. You know, so that was a no-no. No alcohol all during the day. So, I mean, that's just one little example, but there's so many differences like that. And if you look at France, between Paris and then the south or the west of France, the cultures and the way people interact and so on, it's so very different. And I imagine it's the same in many of the European countries because of their history and because of, you know, they had all these little kingdoms and fiefdoms that have their own history and cultural development. So, and it's probably like that in many countries.
It is. I mean, the U.S. is like that. I think the U.K. is like that. People go to London and they think that's what England is like. And then you go up into the north and then you go to Wales or Scotland or Ireland. And it's very different in different regions. And I think it's so easy for us to think that, oh, I've been exposed to that one city or that one person from there and think we know it all. And my goodness, we have so much we can learn. Just appreciating the nuances and listening first. I think that's really key, especially when you're an executive and you're trying to get to know a global company.
Yeah.
Everybody's got a different viewpoint on things, and you're wise to try to take that in instead of just trying to tell them what you want to do.
Yeah, listening first. I think that's a really good philosophy. And the other thing that I did a lot, I mean, I'm a naturally curious person, but I would go to these places and okay, how do you do it here? And why is that going? I'd pick up on tiny little trivial things that I'd observed during the day. And I, why is that? And I'd say, oh, that's how we do it here. Or why do you do it like that? And then I'd kind of dig in and listen, and then you'd learn something about the culture from a trivial little observance that you just made. And then the other one, of course, is making some attempt to speak their language, even though
Yeah.
they know full well.
I'm
Yeah, even though they know full well that, you're just picking up a few words. But if you like little things like learn the standard greetings, learn the standard please and thank yous, and just apply those where you can, that goes a long way to building that trust.
And I loved what you said about asking them, hey, why do you do things this? Not in an accusatory manner, in a manner that you really want to understand, because I think it's so, for whatever reason, I think that, and maybe this is more of a US thing, maybe it's not this way everywhere, but I see that in the States, executives feel like they need to look like they know everything. And so they want to tell everybody how it's going to be. But when you can get the expertise from the people actually doing the jobs, you're a whole lot better able to figure out the best way to move the company forward. And I think that's unfortunately a skipped step in some cases. I will say most of the executives I worked with over the years were European or US based, some in Australia. But most of the companies were, they were global companies, but they were very much entrenched in whatever culture was the native for the headquarters.
Yeah. All right. Well, this is fascinating. I mean, we can go on talking about these challenges and leadership and what we can learn from around the world. There's lots of stories there from all our travels, I guess. But I'm just aware of the time. I think it's a good point now to move on to the buzz, which is our innovation round, the same 5 questions that I ask of every guest. And the idea is you'll give us some short, sharp answers with the inspiration for our listener to go and do something awesome today as a result of your answer. You're set?
All right. I'm set, I think.
What's the number one thing anyone needs to do to be more innovative?
Listen and seek to be curious.
Yeah, I love it. And of course, we talked about that quite a bit just now. All right. And the best thing you've done to develop new ideas?
I think learning from other people. So it goes along with the listening too, but also, boy, there's a lot of collective power out there online if you can discern what's real and what's not. I've actually been learning some from ChatGPT lately, just about complex topics. And so it's helping me be on my toes to try to just learn technology and also see what I can find out there from other people. Try to get the collective knowledge of people out there other than just you.
Yeah, it's amazing the resources we have to do that. I mean, I remember growing up, we used to have to travel to the local library and find some books, and then they wouldn't necessarily have the book that I was interested in. And these days we just hop on the internet. Yeah, and I like that you said apply some what's the word? Be critical. Make sure you don't believe, particularly with ChatGPT and these things, don't necessarily believe everything. I love it when I go back and I say, "Are you sure about that?" and it says,
I know.
It says, "Oh, you're right to check." And I've had another look, and in fact, I was wrong.
Yeah, I love some of those great questions to ask these AI engines. Like, what's the one thing you think I should know about XYZ? What one thing have you not told me yet? I mean, just to try to check and see how legit it is, because you can't believe everything that it pops up. But it is a good way to sort of broaden your horizons in a hurry.
That's right. Yeah, it's a real easy way to kind of get a broad overview of a lot of stuff. And the ones that cite the literature, that's often I do that as well. I say cite your sources, because then I can.
Yes, love to look at the source information.
Yeah. All right. So that's a resource. Do you have a favorite resource you use most often?
Oh, goodness. Well, Am I going to sound like everybody else if I say Google is my favorite
No,
resource?
not
But the
really.
fact that you can Google
Yeah.
it, I mean, I just was talking, and by the way, when you focus on what matters and you really look at where life is leading you and think about how you want to have extra time and how you want to spend it, it opens up opportunities for travel.
Mm.
So I was just talking to my travel agent earlier, and she said, I think you'd enjoy Montenegro.
Mm.
And I just put the word in Google, and I had the most beautiful images pop up, and I learned more about Montenegro than I would have had to read a lot of encyclopedia articles in the library back in the
Mm.
day. So I am a
Yeah.
Googler, I must say.
Yeah, that's fabulous. Yeah, we're planning a trip to Japan to do some hiking, and I've
Oh,
I've
nice.
been doing a lot of research on YouTube, and there's lots of YouTubers who've actually
Love the film.
filmed their adventures, and it's sort of um, it gives you some information, but it also really whets your appetite. You say, "Oh, I'd love to go there. That looks
Yes.
awesome." Mm.
It's amazing the things you can find online. You can find people who stayed in the same hotel or went on the same cruise ship and can show you what your room would look
Mm.
like and things that you used to just have to wonder about before a trip. Now you can get really prescriptive on how you'll do things
Mm.
and learn from other people, and it's a wonderful thing.
Mm. Excellent. All right, what's the best way to keep a client on track?
How ground rules. You got to have ground rules. You got to have I like to have a safe word so when we're getting off track, someone can just say that word. Or usually it comes up as squirrel. Always people say, we see a squirrel. But just have those ground rules. They prevent disagreements and you can always go back to them. And it's magical when you use,
Mm. Yeah, and it's good to set that up front, right? So sort of setting
yeah.
expectations. Excellent. All right, final question to the buzz round. What's the number one thing anyone can do to differentiate themselves?
Take some time to dig deeper into self reflection. Understand what makes you unique. And if you don't know, talk to some other people around you, but really take time to think about what is it that I do that's special and how can I do more of that?
Mm.
And even when it comes to your job, if you can answer those questions and think about this is where I really shine and use my talents, if you know that about yourself, you can start to think about how to incorporate more of that into your role. And people rarely take the time to ask themselves those questions. They're just too busy doing
Mm.
to really think about reflecting.
Yeah, the power of self-reflection is so great, isn't it? And and
And
I like that you said ask other people because it is challenging. And often, I mean, I often have an experience when I have a client with me in front of the computer and I'm doing something and they say, "Oh, hang on, how did you do that? That's amazing."
well,
And what do you mean? I wasn't even aware I did it. I'd done anything. And it turns out that I'd done something that was almost completely unconscious to me. And it was just mechanical, so ingrained that the other person had no idea how to do and was just blown away that you could do that. And because it was so ingrained in me, I took it for granted. And they thought I was a genius. It was a superpower. And I just said, "Oh,
yeah. And we all have those
mm,
superpowers. And the companion statement is know what you don't do
mm,
well so that you can surround yourself with people who can shore that up and help you with that
yeah,
stuff. I'm never going to be an absolute expert in Excel pivot tables, but I know people who
yeah,
are. Just know, I like to think that one of my greatest strengths is I know who to call. I've got a good network of people who are good at a lot of different things that I'm not good
mm,
at. And when you know yourself and you grow yourself, you can also figure out how to work more more collaboratively with
yeah,
others
yeah,
who complement you.
yeah. And that's part of the letting go, right? Because a lot of the times, I
Yeah.
mean, certainly in my life, there's a lot of times where I've got to do this myself. So I'd figure out how to do it, which wasn't necessarily the best use of my time because I was starting from zero, and yet there were people out there that were already experts in this. So,
Yes.
mm,
Yes. You know, somebody gave me a tip the other day. I'm sorry, I know we're getting short on time, but it was a spreadsheet that was sitting in front of me that I needed to cull through. And I was like, oh, I've been putting this off for weeks. And he said, run it through Chat
yeah,
GPT. put your spreadsheet up there, say, take out the empty rows, take out this, take out that. And it actually said it worked and it saved me a lot of time. It wasn't 100%, but it was probably 80%. And that 80%
So
saved me
time,
hours.
Yeah, it's brilliant. All right. Well, thanks, Carol. This has been fabulous. Now, where can people find out more about you? Maybe even reach out and say thanks for what you shared with us today.
I would love that. It's all through my website, carolenneking.com. And I'm happy to hear from people anytime. And it tells them a lot about what I've got going on too.
Brilliant. Thanks. And of course, we'll have that link in the show notes. So finally, as we wrap it up, what action would you like our listeners to take from our conversation today, Carol?
I would love for people to stop and reflect and think about what small steps they can take to rebalance their lives and focus on what matters and let some things go. And it's not the letting go that hurts or makes you feel like you're a failure. It's the letting go of the stuff that really doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And if you can find one or two things to let go of, that's a win. And, if they want to really do something beyond that, they're welcome to take a look at my book, The Rebalancing Act.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks so much for sharing your time and your insights with us. That's a great call to action to end up on. And I really enjoyed our conversation today, Carol. All the best for the future, and please do stay in touch.
That sounds great. Thank you so much, Jürgen.